Hi, I'm Seth, and today we're going to talk about some easy repairs on the clarinet. When you're looking for the serial number on your clarinet, it's usually on the upper joint at the back on the bottom, just above the lower tenon. There are some makes and models where you might also find it just above the thumb rest on the lower joint. The first thing we're going to look at are the tenon corks. The tenon corks are these corks that are on the ends of the actual body parts of the clarinet. These corks help friction fit these parts together and keep them airtight, as well as allowing you to still take them apart. The problem is that these corks break down over time. A couple of things that can help keep them in great condition is to never get them wet. Obviously, we don't want to wash any of the parts of the body because of the pads and the corks. But we can also use cork grease. And the cork grease will do two things. It will help protect the cork against water getting in there if there is from any vapor from our mouths or anything like that. But it also helps lubricate when we put these parts together, and that way the cork doesn't tear. If the cork does tear off, there's a couple of things you can do. One is easy. You can just send it to your repair shop. If you happen to need it in an emergency, let's say it's right before your concert, you can take the cork that has fallen off and put it back on with some hot glue. You could also use some other things. This is called pad and cork cement. You can get at your local repair store. A very common issue with clarinets is when you're actually putting the body together. Sometimes the tenon will actually get broken. The plastic itself will break. So that usually happens when people are putting it together improperly. So make sure that you're pressing down on the keys to lift up that bridge key. You're lining it up, and I like to say you're motorbiking it together. You're pushing it and spinning it. I say motorbike like you're driving a motorbike. That's going to make sure that your bridge key does not get bent, and it's also going to make sure that your cork is in good condition. While we're on the subject of the bridge key, if you notice that some of the pads and keys are not working properly, it's probably because of a bent bridge key. When I press down any of these keys in the lower part of the body, it also presses down and closes this one. You can see that that is actually still movable. That means that my bridge key has been bent. So if you feel comfortable with it, you can be bending some of these back so that it seals. This is where those non-knurled pliers really come in handy. You're going to find out which way that key needs to be bent, whether it's up, down, side to side, whichever plane it needs to be bent on, perhaps two of them, and bending it back. Be careful when bending keys. Keys are usually made of nickel, so they're a little bit strong. Some keys, however, are nickel plated and made of brass, which is mostly copper, which is very, very soft. So start off by trying to bend it slowly so that you don't break it off. Remember, any metal that bends is not going to bend back the exact same way. If you took a paper clip and unwound it and tried to bend it back into the same shape, it's not going to be perfect. The same thing goes for bending a key. You need to make sure that you know where to bend. If you don't feel comfortable doing that, don't worry about it. Just send it into your local repair shop. When you're looking at your clarinet, sometimes the pads will be in bad shape. You can tell a pad that's either ripped or in bad shape or old by looking at it, literally. If it looks brown and maybe has a tear on it, obviously it's not going to seal. These pads have a very thin membrane that is covering the hole. Underneath that membrane is felt. If that membrane tears, then you're going to have felt trying to cover that hole. It's not going to cover as well as having that membrane. It's not going to be airtight, and we need it to be airtight. So if you see any pads that have any holes or tears or are fluffy looking, you want to get those replaced. Sometimes we have students that are what I like to call pickers. And when they have their clarinet together, they might be just sort of picking at their instrument down here, maybe nervous or something like that. So usually I find that some of the lower joint pads are the ones that have been kind of picked at. So keep an eye out for that. If you find that any pads fall out or are very ripped, right before a concert and you need an emergency repair, then you can take matters into your own hands if you'd like. Again, only if you feel comfortable. You can take off the key, finding the correct pivot screws to back them out, take the key off. You're going to take out the pad, scrape it clean, then take some hot glue or some pad cement, put it in the cup of the key, press your pad back into it, put the key back on, and try to get it as level as possible. And that's really the key. Obviously, you're not going to do as great a job as a repair person because you don't have all the tools. But in an emergency, it might get you through a concert if you don't have a spare clarinet. Sometimes you might notice that the springs come off of the keys. Each key has a little wire spring, and that is where the spring hook comes in. You really can't get your finger in there to press or to pull on those wire springs. So that's where this comes in handy. You can hook it around it, you can push it, make sure that it's on the right side so that the key is either sprung open or shut the way it's supposed to be. If when you're inspecting your clarinet, if you notice some of the screws or rods are starting to poke out, you can always just tighten them up a little bit. Make sure that the key is still free. We don't want to over tighten things so that they are too tight and it pulls those posts in and snags up our keys. We don't want that. Some of the screws up top we don't really want to touch because these are adjustment screws. These deal with how high some of these mechanisms that work together are. We don't want to mess with that unless you really know what you're doing. Sometimes you might find that some of your keys, either the side keys or your A or G sharp key, are not opening and closing the way you want them to. For that, you're going to take your unknurled pliers, and again, you're going to find the way that it's bent and try to bend it back out that way. Again, if you don't feel comfortable, just send it into your repair person. While you're inspecting the clarinet, it's always a good idea to check out the mouthpiece, make sure that the cork is in good condition, make sure that the facing, the tip, the rails of your mouthpiece, where the reed is going on, are in good condition. There should be no dents or scratches, deep scratches really. There could be some slight scratching. Make sure that the tip is not chipped, okay? Remember, that surface needs to be perfectly flat, so when the reed is on there and vibrating against it, that seals momentarily, and that's what creates our sound. Any big chips or big deep scratches can really affect the sound. As a general rule, it's a good idea to get your students to swab your clarinet after every play. So you're going to put it upside down, they're going to swab it through from the bell down to the barrel, making sure the mouthpiece is off, and they're going to swab it through. That's going to take any of that moisture out of the clarinet that they've just blown into it, and hopefully save your pads, make them last a lot longer. Just like with all the instruments, anything you find with respect to the condition of your instrument, make sure that you adjust your digital inventory accordingly.